One of my favorite meetings ever was with this guy who said, I don't understand the point of this script and I don't know who would make it or where it would go. I said, this is my favorite meeting I've ever had. I needed someone to tell me that more than anything. Thank you so much. Let's talk or never talk again.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do. I'd like to know the things that specifically make you.
Hey there, I'm Tim Barnes, you are the genre, and in each episode of this show, I ask someone about the first genres that inspired them, the first crafts they pursued, and how they feel about those pursuits now. Molly McAleer joins me this episode. She's written the memoir titled The Alcoholic Who Ruined Your Life, Stories About Love, Death, and Rehab, was a writer on the CBS series Two Broke Girls, one of the 3 co-founders of the popular female-friendly website Hello Giggles, and currently runs a casual podcast empire at the Solid Listen Network, where she co-hosts the Trend Lightly podcast with Tiffany Maddox and hosts the Mother May I Sleep With podcast about Lifetime original movies. So the question is, Mother, may I sleep with podcast? It all makes sense if you listen to the show. Also, I'm a guest on an upcoming episode. Unlike many of the guests on You Are the Genre so far, who I knew already before pressing record, Molly and I spoke as strangers via mics from our separate homes across the coasts of America with our cameras off. Nothing really feels more futuristic than that. But to make it even more interesting, I think this recording was from the day after my birthday or something like that, back in January, and close to her birthday. There was a Capricorn synergy at play in this episode. So buckle up for this thrill ride of a conversation with Molly McAleer. You have a podcast empire. That's what I know of you.
Well, I don't know if I would say all that. I did start my first podcast back in 2009. I was just a big fan of the medium back in the day. It was a very limited thing at the time. You were paying for server space. There was no free way to upload a podcast back then, but we had amazing guests. We had like Norm Macdonald, Mark Ronson, Whitney Cummings, just like a lot of people that were really not even used to podcasting at the time, which was so cool. Those episodes, unfortunately, are like gone from the internet because we did stop paying for server space.
Oh, wow.
That's
okay.
very much in the Ira Glass begging for money for server space era. So then in 2013, I want to say, my best friend Christina Lopez and I were both at a crossroads. The company that she was working for just got shut down. I had left the big projects I had for 3 years consecutively. I was writing on a TV show and running a startup. And I think I was just burnt out and we needed something creative to do. And I thought, why not do it together? We've always loved podcasts. So I started a podcast called Please Advise. And it was an advice podcast that ran for like 5 years. We had major, awesome guests on that show. We had Lizzo before she was famous. It was really great. And then, it just sort of ran its course. For those who are wondering, yes, Christina and I still are best friends. I sometimes get that question. And I'm like, yes, we just stopped doing a podcast. So at that point, I really was just loving the medium. And I decided to start a show called Mother May I Sleep With podcast, which podcast is important. You're asking your mom if you can sleep with the podcast. We were working with someone for a while. It was like, a lot of people are just dropping podcasts from their show names. Do you want to do that? I'm like, no, because you're asking to sleep with the podcast. And that was a show that I was supposed to do for like 15 episodes. That was my initial plan, just to have something that was right after I had sold a pilot that didn't get made. And I thought, okay, how am I going to explain this resume gap? Or are people going to wonder what I've been doing? I wasn't doing like blogging or a lot of the stuff that I had sort of come up doing. So I wanted to create this 15 episode sort of like capsule with just really great guests. And it wound up being something that people really enjoyed. And I wound up just throughout quarantine, I went from stop doing seasons to basically doing it every single week, which is an endeavor, but enjoyable.
Talking about gap years, because in the entertainment industry, gap years are scary, but they're also necessary because I've written for a couple of TV shows, and there's a point where it feels like you have given all of your soul to, and not in a negative way, like that's the job. You're paid pretty well to give your soul to someone else's voice, essentially. Sometimes it feels like you need a little bit of a break to write something in your own voice. And it sounds like you've done that. You had a pilot that sold but didn't get picked up. All very exciting things. But how did you get to the point where you were writing for Two Broke Girls? You also had a startup at the same time.
Hello,
And
giggles. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like what brought you into that sort of position of creativity?
How do you mean? Like, do you mean like from when I was a kid, or do you mean from what were the years preceding those two things?
I think you're following the right instinct. Let's go back to your childhood, Molly. Let's get back to
Let's get in
the core
there.
of the show. Within talking about your childhood, tell me what the first genre is that called out to you in your youth.
I think I would say comedy, followed shortly by mystery, because my grandfather wrote mysteries and my whole family is just really funny. I always say, like, my uncles are my creative influence. My mom had me young, and I was raised at home. My youngest uncle was 16 when I was born. She was 21 when she had me. It wasn't
Hmm.
unbearably young, but it was difficult for her. And I was sort of raised in this environment with all adults where I just had to hang at a really young age. And one of the big things we all did was just make each other laugh and watch a ton of comedy.
Quinta Brunson, I've heard in a lot of interviews for Abbott Elementary that she also grew up in this like multi-generational household, and because of that she had all kinds of different comedic influences, and it sounds like you had that as well.
For sure.
So you probably learned how to entertain people in a lot of different ways. Like I can't imagine the layers of inside jokes and references that you have.
I was a very hammy, but also I would say I was precocious in the right way as a child. I was absolutely, I talk about this a lot with my co host of Trend Lightly, which is my sort of internet news show that I do. We were both raised by single mothers and only children, and sort of raised to have conversations with adults at a very young age. And so I knew I had to hang. And whenever I was in a situation where I'd go over to like a friend's house and it would come dinner time and I'm talking to their parents would always be like, "Where do you come from? Like, no one else is coming over and asking us questions about our marriage or where we went to high school and like what it was like back then and cracking jokes." And I would say, like, I always had, a really rich tapestry of culture around me because my mom was a hippie. My grandparents were World War II era
Mhm.
folks, and they raised me just as much as my mom did. So I'm kind of forever 25, I think. I think my brain broke, but then also very much an old lady. I come to you today in my bathrobe.
Did you say that your father or your grandfather wrote mystery novels? Because you mentioned comedy as your first interest, which makes sense because that's the best way to ease any tension or to just get everyone on the same page. And it sounds like that came in really handy in your childhood home. But where does mystery come in? And can you elaborate a little more on your connection to it?
So, no dad, but my grandfather was a professor at Boston College, where I wound up going, and had his doctorate in English at Harvard. He used to brag that he was like the first Catholic allowed into the program, which I think must have been, at the time, how revolutionary. And he worked primarily, I would say, as a biographer. His biography of Rex Stout is the one that I think he did the best with. It was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize and, just great. But he wrote a book with, oddly enough, this guy that like robbed my aunt at the bank, but we didn't know until later that he was the guy who robbed Auntie Alice. I know, it's crazy.
Wait. And you're saying your grandfather wrote with someone that in retrospect or in later he learned robbed your aunt?
Yeah, he was a guy in prison. And my grandfather had a column in the Boston Globe at the time called The Family Man, where he just wrote about, I mean, I guess it was like Dave Barry esque, but maybe a
Yeah.
little bit more proper for the time. And he was a fan of my grandfather's and would write him from prison. And they had some really interesting World War II stories in common. And my grandfather used to go visit him. He would have the kids on Sunday and he would bring them up to the prison to go visit his prison friend. And then, my grandfather didn't ask him what he was in there for quite some time.
Uh,
And one day he did ask him, or perhaps maybe Billy volunteered, I'm not sure, that he was in jail for robbing a bank. And it turns out that the teller at the bank was my Aunt Alice, my great Aunt Alice.
talk about a great third act reveal. What's interesting about that to me is that comments on the similarity between comedy and mystery, because that is both highly situational. You know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, he loved mystery. I was a
Uh,
big Murder She Wrote fan. I always say I have like an iron stomach because I used to just sit through him detailing gore like at dinner. So it was a really kind of cool environment to grow up in, just in terms of different influences. Yeah.
did you get the label of an old soul?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I
I got
still
that
get it. I
too.
mean, half
Yeah.
of my friends are like 60-year-old men.
Yeah, there is something about talking to people from an older generation that I also have a fondness of that, because it seems like they have ability to cut through all the crap and just focus on what really matters.
Oh yeah, no. One of my friends just died of old age.
Wow.
So like,
Yeah.
it's which is fine,
Yeah. Yeah.
one would figure. But yeah, it's I think yeah, the intergenerational stuff is really important to me. I think that, for all the talk we do about grooming, et cetera, in society, I would say my life has been very charmed by some of these people that I met when I was in my early 20s living in LA. And, now here I am, just turned 40. And, they're going to meet me at Dave and Buster's tonight for my birthday.
Nice. Yes. Happy birthday to you
No,
tonight.
happy birthday to you. My
Wow.
birthday was the 10th, but we're
Oh
going
yeah.
tonight because I
Okay. I remember
figured
you mentioned that in text. Yes. Well, yeah. Happy belated birthday. I can't believe I
thanks,
forgot
man.
to say that to you.
You're good.
Talking about mystery, it feels like you were perhaps born with a natural mystery of your father in some way. Is
No,
there
I
a
know who
connection
my
there?
dad is.
Okay.
I know who he is. And so does my mother. That was never a mystery. Although the father space in my birth certificate is blank. I didn't know until I was 5 that I was supposed to have a dad. And it turned out that in kindergarten, sometimes Katie's dad is going to pick her up today.
And you're like,
And
oh my God, dads are a thing.
yes. And I remember, asking my mom, can my dad pick me up? And they were like, well, grandpa can. And I was like, but why don't I have a dad? And she did tell me that I do have a father. And he was in my life for about 5 years. And then when I was about 10, I just confessed to my mom that I felt less happy after seeing him than I
Oh,
felt happy. So then I iced him out. That was my first professional icing out gig. And yeah, I've moved on from there. But no, he passed away like while I was at Two Broke Girls.
okay.
And I
Okay.
felt nothing. And that's the
Oh,
thing I feel bad about.
I'm sorry about the nothingness. Yeah.
No, it's fine. I like, as I said, I grew up in such like a village environment that I never felt like a real absence of love there.
Do you feel like that village aspect of your childhood was different from the bulk of your friends?
Yes, because I grew up in an upper middle class town and my mom grew up in that town too, Lexington, Massachusetts. And she was, a single mom. She cleaned houses to get me through school to make sure I could stay in Lexington because they have some of the best schools in the state. Cleaned houses, catered. And she was a ceramics major in college. She was a fine arts major with a concentration in ceramics. So she definitely was not doing what she had set out to do. But yeah, she had to work really, really hard to keep us there. And I started working young too. And growing up as someone who technically lives in a rich town, I'm always
Yeah.
telling people, like, don't get it wrong. Like, don't get it twisted. Like, we lived in one of the few sort of apartment complexes there were in town. A lot of my friends came from two-parent homes with brothers and sisters that were financially, they had a cushion. Like, not a lot of my friends were worried about spending money and having a job when they were teenagers. And that was just something that I had, that hustle in me, that I knew I wanted to be something big. I knew from when
Mm.
the time I was a little girl, I wanted to live inside the TV. Wherever the TV was, I wanted to live inside of there.
Yeah.
And I, never got into school plays. I never did anything, but part of me knew that having a good work ethic and starting working really young would carry me. That is not something that was on a lot of my peers' minds at all. They were from much more straight-laced families, I would say. A lot of doctors, a lot of lawyers, a lot of dads who go wherever dads go during the day.
Well, I connect with especially that draw towards the television and the magic of it and just wanting to be on the other side of it. And I love that, your other side of that was working on a very like not only is Two Broke Girls a pretty classic style sitcom, it's a sitcom that stands apart from the bulk of the stuff, like even still, that is created today. And when you watch it, it feels a bit like almost like a play. Like I can feel a level of vaudeville in episodes of Two Broke Girls, and I can feel a type of laughter that is actually pretty rare, I think, for sitcoms with the live studio audience.
Yes, that was the play thing, by the way, was the vision of the showrunner. And you're supposed to feel that way. And I'm really glad that, that stands out to you. I had nothing to do with the creation of the show, but being there the first 3 years, I was the broke girl. I had $37 when they
Mm.
hired me, and my blonde roommate had to drive my brunette ass to the valley to go do this meeting and see if I could get on a show.
Uh,
So yeah, it was very real to me. And some of those first 3 seasons are based a lot on experiences that I lived when I was truly a broke girl.
yeah. And I also identify with what you mentioned about that disconnect between your like village style family, everyone taking care of each other in one space. I grew up like in the same house that my dad grew up in South Central LA,
Oh,
and
wow.
he was one of 8 kids. And then eventually, like my mom take over the house, and it's just me and my sister. But there was constantly a rotation of people. We eventually moved out of LA to Moreno Valley in the Inland Empire, Riverside County.
Okay. Oh, Riverside.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we moved there when I like my last year of middle school, and eventually going to I went to Santa Barbara City College and stuff. It's not translatable, a lot of these scenarios that I that I grew up in. But my mom really relied on that village sensibility of like, yeah, about all the siblings or cousins or whatever her same
Aunties,
age.
uncles,
Yeah,
cousins.
yeah. After
Yeah.
school, like one auntie picks him up. You go to another auntie's house or a grandma's house, and I can sense even some sorrow my mom's in of that type of thing, kind of fading away from the norm in a way, and away from what young people expect from their lives. And I wrestle sometimes with what is the actual thing that we should be aspiring to in that regard.
I mean, we were a generation of people that were kind of set up for one thing and wound up doing another. I graduated directly into the recession. I graduated in 2006, and I had interned out here the summer before in Los Angeles for New Line Cinema and publicity, because I was writing college and comedy. That's how I got into writing comedy. And I was recommended for this internship. They were just like, if someone's going to go out to LA, it should be Molly. So I went out and I wound up getting offered a job at the end of the summer. And when I came back, there was no job. I had to go to a temp office, and I worked like a few days here, a few days there. But it's not surprising that a lot of our generation sort of has these kind of mushy feelings about what they're supposed to be versus what they are.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I do think there's so much amnesia that we've gone through, specifically. Like I graduated high school in 2007, Great Recession, then then the Trump years, and on top of the Trump years, the pandemic. It's been a lot of restarts, and it's kind of frightening how we, I think, as a coping mechanism, try to act like the bad times never happened.
Because what can you say about them? You know what I mean? That's how I feel. It's like, what can you really say about it? In a weird way, I look at January 6th, just that day of watching TV and like watching it unfold. There was something so thrilling about it for me. I was like, you know what? Maybe it was all worth it. This is crazy.
Okay, well, I think you need to clarify for the listeners why you found it thrilling. I don't want to leave you in that nebulous space of
Oh, the
I was excited to
mystery.
see. Oh, there we go, the mystery.
The mystery, the chaos, the mayhem. My rising sign is Aries. I do love some classic chaos, and it was just the biggest freak show that I've ever seen in my life, and I couldn't stop watching it from various angles. There was heroes, there was obviously a lot of losers. It was so feral, and here I was sitting in my bed watching all of it after being locked in my house for several months, so it was just it felt like a little cherry on top. I hope something comes from that soon. We've been waiting an awfully long time.
Okay, I think this has revealed the most about your personality, that you are watching everything on a very macro level, which feels like the level of a mystery writer. So you mentioned that you were doing comedy writing in college. Would you say that specifically was the first craft that you pursued?
Well, this is the interesting thing. I started my career of sort of comedy writing, quote unquote, putting myself out there comedically, because I used to call the AM radio stations in Boston when I was a kid, when I was home alone. And I would argue with these conservative political commentators. And I actually knew my stuff because I had such a fresh little brain and ADHD that, I would get really obsessed with something. That just became a thing for me. So where I didn't get into the school plays or anything else, it became obvious to at least like my Uncle Andy was the one who said, I will buy you a new pair of basketball sneakers, something I've never asked for or wanted in my life. I'll buy you a new pair of basketball sneakers if you try out for one of the sketch groups at school. And on the anniversary of one of my other favorite days, 9/11, first anniversary of 9/11.
For the mystery.
For the mystery. I know. Well, it's just, I don't know. It was so traumatic. Like, I just can't help but like rewatch the footage and keep learning about it.
Let's truly unpack this now. What is it about these feral, chaotic world events that draws you in so much?
Well, I think it was just world-changing stuff. I mean, Columbine happened my freshman year. I was my senior year of high school, 9/11 happened. And I feel like those bookends on my high school experience were like really like brain shattering in some ways. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know, 9/11 is still pretty huge. So I don't think I'm the only one who can't stop looking at it.
I feel like you refer to these events like they're Marvel movies.
I might, and that might be part of me making light of it. But yeah, no, no, I mean, obviously they're bad things. Do I have to say out loud that those are bad things? It was awful, over 2,900 people died. But yeah, it was so 9/11 happened, and then I got into a sketch comedy group.
You got into the sketch comedy group. At what point did you start to take it seriously? And what made you start to take it seriously?
It was when I realized I was no longer going to pursue politics as a career, and that because I found something that I thought communicated with the masses just as much, but in a better way, which was comedy writing. And so I switched my major to film so that I would just, get to play and do that kind of stuff and learn and watch movies. But I don't know if I went to college. I think I paid a lot of money to be in a sketch comedy group. Like all I did was write. I was like very much a prolific writer for the group. And there was no head writer position, but had there been, I think that I would have been that. And so, yeah, I threw my back into it. And that summer that I was out here for an internship at New Line, I was the first UCB sketch class that they held in LA. And I managed to get one of the 13 spots in it. And I really, really solidified that I wanted to do comedy when I took that class and thought I was so much funnier than most of the people there. Meanwhile, like all of the people who were in that class with me are very successful. So, but yeah, no, it was really sort of that perfect storm. I just loved writing sketches.
You said that the way that you were getting your message across comedically was better than you felt you could get perhaps the same message across politically. What was your specific political goal at the time? Like, was it all the way up to president, or you wanted to be a
No.
grassroots organizer, or?
So there was like a terrible guy in Boston, and I am losing his name, but he was the governor, and he got caught going out on a boat with some hot ladies while he was in office with funds, which is strange because he also was a Republican in Massachusetts, which is we definitely have them, but not many. And so he went from being the governor to talk radio. So that inspired something in me. And I realized I think I wanted to be a lawyer. I still love the law. I love the parts of the law that are fun and fair. And then I figured, okay, I'll become a lawyer. I will ease into politics. Maybe I'll be a senator or I'll work smaller and be a governor. And then in my retirement, I'll move to talk radio.
Interesting. So talk radio was the goal, political talk radio.
I think you know what? In my weird brain, as someone who didn't have big picture stuff or people pointing out to me that you could go to Hollywood or you could have bigger aspirations, I think in my mind that was making it. I don't think I thought somehow I could be in the TV, but that I had to stay in Massachusetts. And that internship really changed things for me.
I mean, naturally, there's a massive connection here that you have your own podcast empire, an audio empire.
I don't know if you could say that.
A podcast small country. How about that?
Sure.
And sorry, there's I don't know if you can hear the police siren, but
I can. It doesn't. If I were you, I would have kept that in. I like the ambient. By the way, how much do you cut this down?
This is going to be about like 40 minutes to an hour. I'm trying not to cut it down too much, but I just cut out like the occasional and things that just to smooth out phrasing and stuff like that.
All right. I feel like I'm a little ADHD and all over the place. So
no, this is great. No,
you want to cut some stuff out. I'm not trying to be that guest, that's like trying to micromanage or you don't need to like hype me up, but I'm just saying that I think I am being pretty ADHD. So
no, this is great. And actually, if you don't mind, I think this would be a great meta episode where I keep all this kind of stuff in. Even
okay,
the
sure.
siren that just went by. Why not? Let's see how everyone chime in about whether or not you think I should cut out sirens.
Leave 5 stars on iTunes reviews, but then in the comments, feel free to leave your regular notes for this episode as if you hadn't given 5 stars, but you got to leave the 5 stars first.
Don't scroll away. You Are the Genre will be right back after the break. You Are the Genre is currently an independently produced podcast, which is something that I keep saying as a way to just highlight the fact that I don't have space for Taco Bell ads or things. Do they still do the MeUndies thing? That was always my favorite, when Mark Maron, in the middle of saying something tragic about his life, would cut to an ad about edible arrangement underwear websites. I don't know. Anyway, I usually use this void in the middle of the podcast to talk about things that I've just been enjoying. Just a little update about my current life in the middle of this episode from a past version of myself. You know what I mean? This is the most current Tim Barnes that you're listening to right now. And one of the things that I'm loving is something that I discovered while on an episode of Molly McAleer's Mother May I Sleep With podcast. It's a Robert Townsend directed and written Lifetime original movie titled Jackie's Back, starring Jennifer Lewis as a soul singer named Jackie Washington. This is in the vein of This Is Spinal Tap, a humorous documentary about a fictional diva, and it has layers of comedy and emotion that I think clearly makes this an uncut gem in terms of comedies that most people are aware of. I think everyone should log on to Tubi as of this week and give it a watch, because I had a really fun time watching that. Another thing that I've been enjoying, and this is me really, opening up quite a bit to you all. This is a bookstore that's just in my neighborhood that I've been working at part-time, called Taylor & Co. Books. It's in Ditmas Park, Brooklyn, a great bookstore. The owner, Andrew, he grew up in the neighborhood, and it's become one of those places that's really bringing this specific Brooklyn community together. And it's also fulfilled. Just about a month ago, I think I started working there part-time. It's fulfilled my dream of working in a place like that. Just a small mom and pop type place where I get to have a staff pick. That's right. I have a staff pick in this bookstore. The only book I have on it right now is probably my favorite book, called The Intuitionist by Colson Whitehead, which is about high stakes elevator inspection. This is a book about elevator inspectors, and I love it. Taylor & Co. happens to be fundraising right now, so if you would like to support this place that has been supporting me, go to taylorcobooks.com. That's taylorcobooks.com, and click on the little button that says We're Fundraising. You know who's also fundraising? This isn't a fundraiser. I'm just here to tell you that You Are the Genre has a corresponding newsletter. So you can sign up for free to get updates on episodes of this show, jokes that I write, other types of interviews that I do, just everything, about this podcast, as well as the extracurricular world of Tim Barnes. But if you upgrade to paid, you get early access to posts, and you get to listen to next week's episode of You Are the Genre every week, a week early, if that makes any sense. You get to listen to future episodes earlier than the normies. Get all of the information you need at youarethegenre.com. Now, back to the episode. Where were we? You had this goal of being a news anchor or a radio host with a political leanings, and now all you do is essentially the modern version of radio from your home.
Exactly. And I do have such a news problem that I had to create Trend Nightly, which is basically just a place for me to say, hey, this wasn't a bunch of wasted time online this week. I actually was doing research. And so we find, the most niche stories, or obviously some of the most large trending stories, and we get into the nitty gritty of it. And, I think in some ways, part of the spirit of it was, inspired by maybe the shorter bits on Reply All, but really was just inspired by, some of the classic talk radio or entertainment shows like Talk Soup or even Entertainment Tonight. I love that. I started out in news when I first started writing in LA. I worked for Defamer, which was an offshoot of Gawker.
How did you enjoy that? That feels like you could be the head of a mystery story doing that line of work.
You know what? It's funny. I felt like that was the perfect career boot camp. I have no notes. I mean, I wasn't writing for Defamer. I was the videographer. So I was out doing a lot of man on the street stuff. I was at a lot of events. I was
Uh,
doing things, anything from red carpet to showing up to a press junket to just going out on the streets of Hollywood and trying to create magic out of nothing. I did daily videos every day of the week on the website. And so that was a grind that was crazy. I was working like 80 hours a week because as the videographer, it was also my job to like anticipate everything that could be interesting on TV that weekend. And so there were so many moments that I watched or, that I just was like, this is going to be legendary. Like that split screen fight on The View between Hasselbeck and O'Donnell,
yeah.
referring to them like they're football players, or that, the Kanye Taylor Swift moment. Don't go crazy about this, but do you remember that Tom Cruise video from the Church of Scientology that was leaked? It was like the Mission Impossible music with him.
No, but that sounds, I'm going to be looking that up for sure.
Gawker refused to take that down and actually was in, I think, a lawsuit with the Church of Scientology. And I unfortunately was the one who had to rip that and put that online. So, in a way, it felt like being a part of, keeping up with history. And I just got very addicted to that. And the hours that you work at Gawker and just sort of the 24/7 demanding nature of the job was really something special.
Yeah, those kinds of jobs are super exciting in your youth. But I wonder if you had any frustration at all. Like, did you have a specific goal when you were doing that job, and did you feel like you were far away from it? Because I've had jobs where you got this thing and it's so far removed from the big thing that you want to do. Let's say the big thing is writing for television. Did any frustration manifest for you? And if so, how did you deal with it while doing this exciting 24/7 job for a Gawker spinoff?
I did not have any goals. I did not come out here with like a set plan. I just knew I was going to make it, baby. I did not think of being a TV writer on my own. It was a friend of mine who said, like, you got to get your shit together and like write a script because, like, what are you going to do? Long term, you're making $7 on the weekends and $11 on the weekdays to pump out like 12 blog posts, and that's not sustainable. And I would say that my great frustration came with how poor I was. I would get like night editing jobs and stuff like that on occasion, but I never had health insurance. I never had a regular salary. My parents are very much that sort of like meme slash actual cultural thing where it's like white parents do not help out their kids. Like that was very much the thing. Like they would full blown, my mom and my stepdad at the time would like let my phone shut off for a week in LA. And
Oh,
that they
wow.
did not
Yeah,
have,
yeah.
they didn't need to let that happen. That was something that was like a lesson for me to learn. And there was many, many days and nights dodging the landlord and really, it was a really like dark, depressing time, but also some of the most simple and fun days of my life. And I didn't have anything to worry about. I didn't, outside of like, what's the future going to hold for me? I didn't really have, now I have like a little house that I'm like thinking about selling because sometimes it's just too much work and all this stuff. But no, I never felt impatient outside of I just needed something to stick. And I had so many pokers and so many fires.
Mm.
And I'd been working on this website called Hello Giggles with my friend Sophia for a while. And then Zoe Deschanel wanted to come and join us. She met Sophia at a workout class. And like I was the one who had the internet history. So that was my job because I had like a fairly well-known Tumblr blog and people knew me from Defamer and I had a lot of, I would say, fans in the industry. And that's sort of, I just was in a holding pattern. And like occasionally twice a year, like some $4,000 check would come in out of nowhere and completely save my ass. But like I also live very close to the edge. Like if I had $5 in my bank and it only cost $3 for a beer at the Cha Cha Lounge, like, yeah, I can go out. So that was my exhaustion.
Do you feel like you've gotten away from that living on the edge phase? Do you consider that a phase, or is that still a major part of your personality now?
Well, I'm not financially uncomfortable, but I definitely do not like monetize to the best of my ability. Like that's why when you say podcast empire, it's kind of like, yeah, I put a lot of stuff out there, but I'm not making the money I could, should, or would if I knew how to do this, that, or the other thing. Like, Tim, my whole thing is I never want to get shoehorned into anything. That's why I've
Mm.
had a career, quote unquote, made up of like such a collage of things, like
Yeah.
on one hand with Hello Giggles, like I onboarded our first 300 writers and helped them come up with their columns. And a lot of those people went on to be very successful with podcasting. I've found some great voices and developed shows with them and really helped allow them to fly, and that's really fun. Like, but some days I'm like, okay, I got to get my consulting website up because you're
Mm.
just too good at this to not make money doing it.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that, but it's true. Like when you help literally over 300 people kind of spread their wings, like you have to admit, okay, maybe that's an area that I enjoy even more than pursuing my own personal art. But I also was up looking for ways to be a nail tech the other night. Like I never want to have, in a weird way, that's one thing that I have to say I kind of admire about Joe Rogan's career. But put your pitchforks down. I'll explain. He's done a little bit of everything. He's done, stand up allegedly.
Yeah.
He's been on TV shows as an actor. He was the host of Fear Factor.
Mm.
He does the UFC stuff. He has the podcast, and I just love anyone who's able to have a little bit of a ramshackle career like that. I'm not saying I love Joe Rogan. I'm saying that I
Yeah.
love that type of career is what I really aspire to have. And that might include going to nail school.
Well, I feel like that's the best way to tackle it, especially with how chaotic all industries are right now. It's kind of a requirement that you don't have your ego tied to one thing. And it sounds like you're very at home with that as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't want to go drive on all the lots and do staff again. That's not something I really want to do. And well, I'm 99.9% sure I'm autistic. And I went through all the diagnostic criteria for that as a kid because I am dyslexic and ADHD. But at the time, the diagnostic criteria was not applicable to females typically. And so I've been meaning to go get tested for it, but I've just been, I took so many of those tests when I was a kid that for some reason, I'm afraid of it. But I don't know that I swim well, in an interview anymore. It was one thing when I was a 25-year-old sort of manic pixie dream girl. But then when you're 40, you're just autistic. And that's, that's what I think is part of that. I also I've also always enjoyed doing things on my own. That's why in so many ways I really enjoyed starting online because I was just on my own.
I'm curious, trying to find more points of connection, if the fact that you found that you're a pretty good curator, that sounds like what you were describing of your ability to help hone people's voices and organize people. Do you feel like that's connected to your upbringing, to sort of the big house that you grew up in with all of the relatives? Was that sort of a position that you found yourself in, kind of being someone who was able to organize people in a solid way?
No. I don't know where that comes from other than I'm comfortable telling people what they're really good at and helping them figure out a way to stand out in that category, to lean into this part of their personality or to lean into this subject matter because the
Yeah.
way they express it is unique and good and necessary and something that people will be attracted to. I think that everyone can be good at pretty much everything if you just find the right angle. And that's maybe like a little bit of a problem solver in me, but I didn't get good at that till I was way too self-involved to have done that the way that I could now when I was younger.
It sounds like you think in shows as well, and I think I do this too, because we're in this era when it's so easy to make quote unquote content, and I find myself packaging things that I genuinely want to do or ideas that I want to explore, and I feel this urge to package it into this podcast or my newsletter or anything. And it feels like that's I don't know if it's a Capricorn urge. I don't know if it's sometimes I wonder if I'm on the autistic spectrum urge, but I wonder if you think that the reason you do that is because of how much TV you watched or whatever. But even before you got into writing for television, did you find you were doing versions of this as well in different ways?
I think so. I mean, I'm big on a side hustle. I'm big on, having multiple things going on. You never know what's going to stick. I would almost say with you, though, and I don't know if it's chicken or the egg with you, but I think that part of your ability to do that is your producing background, which I consider to be like a really phenomenal skill that I've gotten better at now that I have my head less out of my ass. Part of it's still there. But I think that maybe what that is like you just learned experience a little, don't you think?
I think so, yeah. But I just like shows, and I feel like I often think about who I would like to bring together to make an idea happen while I'm creating it. Or I have friends who are creating content, and I have ideas. Sometimes I don't even tell them. If like, oh, if you just focused on that more, you'd skyrocket. It's almost like sports, I guess. That's like my version of sports. You know how people talk about like, I don't know why they
Yes.
put him on the field to do this. I'm doing that for Stranger Things. I feel like.
Yeah, I think that that's a real skill. I really appreciate people who are able to do that. I don't know if that's how I would verbalize that that's what I do, but I do find that once you figure out that there is in fact a formula, and I'm not talking about comedy math. I hate comedy math. I'm very anti-comedy, truthfully. But once you figure out that there's a set number of things that need to happen in concert in order to give something its best chance, I find that very exciting.
I feel like that's a perfect point to ask what your relationship is to the craft of comedy now. I forget that was the first official thing that you. Oh no, the first official thing it seems was at least the idea of being a political leaning talk radio host.
Well, I just thought that was the most important thing in the world from my very sheltered perspective. And I didn't know how one would possibly become Ann M. Martin, the writer of the Babysitters Club books. That just seemed like way too much. Why would you ever dream that big? But what was the question?
So what's your relationship to that now? So if it was, maybe we can talk about both. But when you think about your interest in radio in that way, or when you think about your original interest in comedy when you started to take it seriously, how do you feel about that now? Like, what's your relationship to both of those things?
I think that I find comedy less in things that are, and this is awful, and I am a WGA member, and I'm not saying this to screw over my union or kill the idea of the very important art of scripted comedy. I'm not trying to do that. The thing I find the most comedy in is really banal things, or even just like documentaries. Like, to me, that's the funniest show I could watch is some documentary, not necessarily talking about reality TV, but like, watching old school or maybe like some lesser known B documentaries is, to me, the thing that's going to make me laugh the hardest 9 times out of 10, even if I'm not supposed to laugh. And I think that I still carry a little bit of that into what I do with Mother May I Sleep a podcast. I mean, the idea of two people talking about a Lifetime movie for 3 hours, like there's nothing funny about that on its face. It actually sounds terrible. And sometimes I find it to be a really difficult show to pitch because some people will say, well, oh, I'm not a comedian. Or some people will say, oh, I don't watch Lifetime movies. And it's like, babe, guess what? You don't need to do either of those things. And in fact, that might be better. Like, I really enjoy the way that show kind of pulls everyone out of their shell. And to me, there's something so funny about that. With Please Advise, it was a comedy advice podcast. So, it was important that the person writing in the letter knew that, we would probably tease, make assumptions, go on our own narratives, but also, we could step back and give good advice if it seemed like the person was really going through it. And I loved doing comedy through that and bringing out the funny parts of other people, my guests. And with Trend Lightly, it brings back to me the absurdity of news, the absurdity of culture, of people, of just, TikTok has been so great just for, one, I guess I would say killing time at the beginning of quarantine, but I'm fascinated by, I don't know, the sort of, I think this is a word, a phrase that's meant for bad stuff, but like human tourism, where it's like you just are popping in on some random slice of life of someone you would never normally meet. And I have a pretty chaotic For You page. So I'll get like really tons of different slices of life. And it's what I love about the app. And it creates the stories that I love telling and sharing with people on Trend Lightly with my wonderful co-host, Tiffany Scott Maddox.
We were talking earlier about your love of chaotic events, and perhaps it's because of how much you talk to people of older generations. Perhaps that gives you a bird's eye perspective on things. And I often think about the fact that all of the advances of the internet bring us closer to how insane it must be, if there is a God, to be God, to hear thoughts, to see all of these slices of life that pop up on your TikTok feed.
If I was God, I would kill myself. I think about the aliens because like they don't even know what we are really, or they might know better than us what we are. But I like, it's a lot. Like there's so much going on. And by the way, every single one of us could be doing it better. And like all of the people before us really left us in a pickle. And it's just, I do worry about the future of the world, which is like this is maybe the political part of me, where I just was always very passionate about what's right, what's wrong, what's fair, what's not fair. You show me an underdog, I'm rooting for them. I don't care what they did. I'm rooting for the underdog. And like that's I think, that's one of the things that just like keeps me so passionate about Trend Lightly in particular, and makes me want. I often think, I joke, Big Molly Media is when the whole InfoWars lawsuit was going on with Alex Jones. I was like, oh, crazy people need something to watch now. Not that kind of crazy, but like what if I did Big Molly Media? And I was joking for like a decent while that I actually started to wonder maybe it's not a joke, but I think it's a joke, which is like a 24-hour news network that's just shit that I care about. And I like that is, I think, a little bit of the kind of way that my mind works, where it's like, well, I don't want to care about one thing. I want to care about all the things. And I want to split screen with someone who's cleaning a carpet, on TikTok.
It's an obsession with the big picture that you have. And I feel like I keep asking questions trying to get to the core of this, because it is like, it feels like a key as well. You said you love mysteries. A key to mysteries is this feeling of a big picture that you don't have access to because you're waiting for the final puzzle pieces to come together. But you know that the big picture is there. Like, is anything that I'm saying, like, what do you think the nucleus
Here's the
of all
thing.
of that is for you?
This is why I told you I was afraid about what kind of guest I would be for your podcast. Because the answer is I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
this is a level of introspection that I don't I think that I would be bullshitting you. And frankly, I think honestly, Tim, I think a lot of people would be bullshitting you if they could say this is where this started and this is
Yeah.
how I became who I became. Someone just put a crack in me and the molten lava started to roll out. Like I have no control over it and I'm not really sure where it comes from. But I guess I would say like a lot of it, even with growing up in sort of this village world, I just always was on my own, you know, like when it came down to it at the end of the day, all I had was myself. So I think part of it comes from just being this self-sustaining, self-preserving buoy in the ocean of life. Like I don't really know what it all comes from or where it's all going. I'm just trying to live, man.
That's perfect. You are, curating time with everything that you do. And it feels like an example of why you are your own genre is because you are able to, through all of these different compartmentalized shows, reveal a different aspect of yourself. And it seems like, big picture, bird's eye view of all of the things that you've created, that's who you are. But you are smart enough to say, I cannot be contained in one in one form. I'm just interested in this
No,
urge that you have to reveal all the forms. Are you disagree with all this?
no. I don't disagree with all of that. I I think that, when you talk about a little bit about sitcoms and world building and stuff like that, I don't know that I really have the vision for all that. Like I have vision. I don't know if that's the vision I'm passionate about. I like that I can just get online and talk to people. I like that I can just press send and the blog entry goes up,
Mm.
or that I can hit publish and the video goes up, or the podcast goes up. And yeah, you have to organize things into segments a little bit. I mean, it would be insane if I had a internet news lifetime original movie podcast. That would be where we also do advice and talk to comedians. I mean, that would be my January 6th, except no fun for me.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like that combo podcast is you, and it feels like perhaps a form of I don't know if therapy is the right word, but perhaps being able to separate it is a part of the joy that you get from doing what you do.
Yeah, I guess. And well, yeah, in many ways, here's the thing is that no matter where I go, the only person I can show up as is myself. I don't have a veneer. I mean, I think that's the reason why in so many ways I hate something like pitching a script or and I've had a couple pilots that weren't made, and I don't know if it was because of the climate or if I just didn't execute my vision as well or rub shoulders in the right way. I'm just not good at, ironically enough, the politics of
Mm.
the industry. And so I think knowing that I'm going to show up no matter where I am and just be Molly McAleer, and that's honestly, I have no vocation. I have no practical skill. My resume is all over the place, but I do know that if I show up and I know exactly what the project's going to be, I can do that and I can do it as well as I can.
And I can only applaud that because comedy and politics are, or just the entertainment industry and the political machine are very similar. Like, and you didn't have goals of
They
being a
live hand
politician or
in
anything,
hand.
but they are like, I have been in so many comedy situations when it comes to like, that this comedian's done awful things, but he is attached to this project or what, you have to
Mhm.
make all these choices. Who do you smile at a comedy gathering or whatever, and I feel like every time I'm in one of those situations, I understand what it's like to be, in Congress where
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And I know other people that are really some of the most talented people I know who haven't figured out, like, babe, you're just not good at the game. And like, not everyone's going to be good at the game. Like, I'm not good at the game. It's okay. Like, that is not an affront to myself. I just know that like I'm going to be weird at parties. I know that like I can't lie to people. I can definitely be I was raised with manners and to be polite and everything else, but I'm not I like there is a lot of politics in this industry, and again, like that's going back to the fact that like, I'm possibly even more neurodivergent than I thought. Like I don't get passive aggression. Like when I do notes segment, like, notes meetings or whatever, I'm just like, tell me it sucked. Or like, let's move on. Like, I like to hear flat out. One of my favorite meetings ever was with this guy who said, I don't understand the point of this script and I don't know who would make it or where it would go. I said, this is my favorite meeting I've ever had. I needed someone to tell me that more than anything. Thank you so much. And like, let's talk or never talk again. Like, it was really honestly so refreshing because a lot of people just won't tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I usually try to end these with the guest giving some sort of advice for things that they've learned along their path. I think that you have given plenty of advice, but are there any key things that you've learned getting to where you are now that you would like to spread to the listeners for how they could do something similar to what you're doing or dissimilar to what you're doing?
I guess my main two pieces of advice are don't be anyone you're not, because it's not maintainable. And people will think that you have a personality problem when you can't do it anymore. And honestly, don't be afraid to put things out there that aren't quote unquote done. That's a big thing that I see so many people spend years hemming and hawing about. Well, if I put this out there and it doesn't work, and it's like, dude, like you're approaching the window of this not even being relevant anymore.
Yeah.
Like we have to get it out there. Let's go. And so that's a big thing for me, is just to, as best as you can, bite the bullet as often as possible and just push yourself out there. I mean, you don't get anywhere in life by not being audacious, really, honestly. In this world, like, you can play it safe, and I don't think that a lot of people really want to do that. Or you can just literally just be like, yeah, I'm going to show up. I'm going to try my best. I'm going to try my hand at this, see if it works. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, but yeah, I mean, I think putting yourself out there, whether it just be online or whether it be, taking a comedy class, doing what, just keep yourself on your toes and like do the best you can to not be afraid of whatever the results are. Oh, lastly, nothing is real until the check has cashed.
Oh, yes.
So just remember that. Yeah.
Right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Once the check is cashed, you can tell people about it. Don't tell people what you're going to work on. Just do it. And that's about it.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for being on the show, Molly.
Tim, I hope I didn't let you down.
Want to know more about Molly McAleer? Check out the Solid Listen Network at solidlisten.com. Freddie Nunez created and sings the You Are the Genre theme song, and Adam Smith produced it. Next week, comedian and co-star of the upcoming Ironheart series on Disney Plus, Sonia Denis joins me on the podcast. But if you become a paid subscriber to the newsletter, you can listen a week ahead of the normies. This is Tim Barnes signing off with your weekly reminder that you are the genre.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do. I'd like to know the things that specifically make